In a worn-down trailer park on the outskirts of Leach, Texas, where rusty tin roofs glimmered beneath the southern sun, lived a 12-year-old boy named Andrew Lane. Every morning, Andrew woke up at 5 a.m., not to play video games or pick out cool outfits like many of his classmates, but to help his mother clean the small bakery where they worked part-time. His mother, Joanne, was a thin but strong woman who always said, "You don't have to be rich to live kindly." Andrew didn't have many friends. His old school uniform, patched at the seams, and his worn-out shoes made him an easy target for teasing at Winslow Elementary. He usually sat in the back row of the class, quiet and reserved, but his brown eyes always held something deep, as if they carried songs he only dared to hum in his mind. Before we continue following Andrew's extraordinary journey, if you also believe that a person's true worth isn't defined by appearance or background but by unwavering passion and perseverance, then please hit like and subscribe to the channel. Together, let's share inspiring stories like this with more people. And now, let's return to the story where more surprises are still waiting ahead. One Monday morning, the principal's voice crackled through the PA system. "Welcome to Talent Week. If anyone would like to sign up to perform, please add your name to the list outside the office by Wednesday." The class buzzed with excitement. Some kids boasted about doing TikTok dances, while others planned to play piano or drums. Andrew stayed silent, but that night, after washing dishes with his mom and listening to an old cassette tape his mother had recorded of lullabies years ago, he picked up a pencil and wrote his name on a small slip of paper. He whispered, "I'll sing that song, Mom. The one you used to sing when I was sick, Scarborough Fair." The next day, he stood still in front of the bulletin board outside the school office. His hands trembled. The list was already long. And then, with a deep breath, he wrote his name on the very last line, Andrew Lane. Singing. Less than 10 minutes later, giggles echoed down the hallway. Andrew signed up to sing? Must be a comedy act. Maybe he'll sing through a rice cooker. Andrew heard every word, but he didn't cry. He just lowered his head and walked away, clutching the little notebook where he had neatly written the lyrics in his tilted handwriting. That evening, his mother found him practicing alone in his room, his voice shaky but as clear as spring wind. Joanne quietly opened the door, said nothing, and eventually sat down beside her son. "You know," she said softly, "I once dreamed of standing on a stage too. But then Grandma got sick, and I had to leave school to take care of her. I never regretted it, but if I could see you walk onto that stage today, that would be the most beautiful gift I've ever received." Andrew looked up at his mother, eyes brimming with tears. "Will you come?" Joanne nodded. "Even if I have to walk there, On rehearsal day, Andrew was the last contestant. The music teacher spoke briefly. "Do you have a backing track?" "No, ma'am. I'll sing a cappella." A sigh and a few eye rolls. But Andrew stood tall, closed his eyes, and began. "Are you going to Scarborough Fair?" It was just his bare voice, no microphone, no instrument, no spotlight. But within seconds, the room fell still. The music teacher looked up. Another teacher, mid-pour with a cup of coffee, froze. Andrew's voice was like a fine mist slipping through the cracks of even the most closed-off hearts. When he finished, no one clapped, not because they didn't like it, but because they'd forgotten what they were supposed to do after something so raw, so fragile had just unfolded. On the way home, Andrew asked his mom, "Mom, if people laugh, should I stop?" His mother smiled and gently squeezed his hand. "No, sweetheart, you keep singing because the world needs to hear the voices that have never been heard." That morning, the courtyard of Winslow Elementary was packed. Flags and decorations draped both hallways, and a temporary stage set up in the auditorium was adorned with colorful balloons. The LED board flashed the words, "Winslow Elementary, let your light shine." Andrew Lane arrived early. He wore a simple white dress, the only one in his closet that was still intact. His mother had carefully ironed every crease. His brown hair was neatly tied into 2 small braids. His face looked a bit tense, but his eyes were determined. In his hands, he still held the faded notebook where the lyrics were written. His mother stood beside him, holding his hand. Even after working the night shift at the bakery, she had made every effort to be there. Her face looked pale from lack of sleep, but her eyes were full of pride. The students performed one by one. There was a modern dance group with sparkling lights. A boy played electronic drums with a small speaker set. A girl in a pink dress sang pop songs through a wireless microphone. Each act was met with cheers from friends in the audience. Andrew sat alone in the waiting area. No one spoke to him. A few sideways glances came his way, followed by soft giggles. Some students whispered, "Just wait, the fairy tale act is coming. I heard there's no music. Going to sing a cappella." Andrew's name was called. "Say the MC." A young teacher announced his performance with a hint of hesitation. "And finally, we have a solo performance without any background music. He will be singing Scarborough Fair. Please welcome Andrew Lane." A few scattered claps. Some students pulled out their phones, ready to record for fun. One even prepared a funny sticker to upload to the school's internal social network. Andrew walked onto the stage. From up there, he couldn't clearly see the crowd. The stage lights were too bright. But he knew his mother was there, sitting in the third row by the window. And that was enough to make him stand tall and take a deep breath. "Are you going to Scarborough? Parsley, sage, rosemary and thyme." His voice rose gentle like wind sweeping across a meadow. Soft, unpretentious, but heartbreakingly sincere. At first, there were whispers and some impatient glances. But gradually the entire auditorium fell into silence. A strange hush spread across the room. Not the kind of silence born from boredom or disinterest, but the kind pulled in by captivation. A music teacher who had been jotting notes earlier suddenly looked up and set her pen down. An elderly parent, with white hair and gold-rimmed glasses, slowly removed his glasses and wiped his eyes. Every word Andrew sang seemed to carry loss. Quiet, hunger-filled nights, and unspoken dreams. No fancy technique, no flashy choreography. Just a child singing with all his heart. When the final note faded, the room remained silent, 3 seconds. Then 4. Then a round of applause erupted. Not loud or rowdy, but full of reverence. And then one person stood. The same elderly parent. Then a second. Then the entire auditorium rose together, applauding as if to thank something pure that had just passed through. Andrew stood still, hands gripping the hem of his dress. Eyes shimmering but no tears falling. The spotlight shone on his face. He was no longer the poor boy who was teased, but a young artist living his dream. Down below, his mother slowly rose to her feet, one hand over her heart, eyes red but lips smiling. After the performance, just as Andrew stepped down from the stage, a woman in a white blouse wearing a name badge approached him. "You must be Andrew, right? I'm Clara Jensen, conductor of the City Children's Choir. I was here today because my daughter performed earlier. But it was you who made me want to come speak. Would you like to visit the studio for a voice audition? There's a special scholarship program." Andrew didn't know how to respond. He turned to his mother. Joanne nodded, eyes glistening. "Go, sweetheart. This is the voice the world has been waiting to hear." On Saturday morning, Andrew Lane stepped into a professional recording studio for the first time. A space where every wall was lined with acoustic foam panels and soft ceiling lights cast a glow that felt both unfamiliar and magical. Outside, the traffic noise of downtown Amarillo buzzed on like any other day. But inside this room, everything felt suspended in time. Clara Jensen, the conductor who had invited Andrew, had picked up Andrew and his mother from the bus station. Clara was a woman in her 50s. Her voice gentle but her eyes keen and observant. "Just think of today's session as a little adventure," Clara said. "No need to worry. I just want to hear you sing the same way you did that day." Andrew nodded, clutching his notebook filled with lyrics like it was a lucky charm. He wore an old white blouse and neat jeans. No makeup, no elaborate prep, just himself, simple and honest. Leo, the studio engineer, sat behind the glass adjusting the microphone and headphones. He had salt and pepper stubble and the quiet demeanor of someone who had seen it all. Someone who had listened to thousands of voices. But when he saw Andrew step into the booth, he raised his eyebrows not out of being impressed but surprised. "This is the kid?" he asked Clara through the intercom. "Yes. Trust me, Leo. Just let him sing." Andrew stepped up to the mic. It was too high. Leo lowered it to match his height. Clara walked into the recording booth and gently placed a hand on Andrew's shoulder. You can sing Scarborough Fair again or any song you'd like. Andrew looked through the thick glass at his mother, who gave him a gentle smile, then turned to Clara. I'll sing that one, my mother's song. No background music, just silence, and the voice of a 12-year-old girl rising in the soundproof room. Are you going to Scarborough Fair? Leo sat still. Clara folded her arms, her gaze softening. Andrew closed his eyes, and each lyric flowed out like a warm breeze weaving its way through a room accustomed only to sterile recordings. When the song ended, no one in the control room spoke for a few seconds. Then Leo leaned toward the mic. You haven't had formal vocal training, have you? No, sir. Yet you know how to stay on tempo, control your breath, and convey emotion without forcing it. Kid, your voice isn't loud. It's not perfect, but it's real. Clara stepped back into the booth and gently held Andrew's hand. Do you know Scarborough is a folk song that's been around for hundreds of years? My mom sings it often. Andrew replied. She says it's a lullaby for dreamers. Clara smiled. Maybe that's why your voice reaches people the way it does. That very afternoon, Clara sent the recording to the admissions board of Emerson School of Music, where she served as an advisory member. It was part of a partial scholarship program for young talents from rural areas. Only 2 students were selected each year. You don't have to beat anyone, Clara told Andrew. You just have to be yourself. 3 weeks later, a pale blue envelope bearing the school's logo arrived at Andrew's temporary address. Joanne, his mother, opened it with trembling hands. Dear Andrew Lane, we are deeply impressed by your recording. With unanimous approval from the selection committee, we are honored to invite you to join Emerson's Distinguished Summer Scholarship Program this June in Austin. All tuition, travel, and lodging expenses will be fully covered. Joanne couldn't hold back her tears, and Andrew simply stared at the letter for a long moment before whispering, Mom, I got in. For the first time in his life, Andrew Lane felt like he was no longer sitting in the back row. June in Austin blazed bright, the sun stretching like a golden cloth over roads shaded by ancient oaks. Emerson Conservatory stood modestly at the top of a hill, its historic red brick building lined with hand-painted frosted glass windows. For many students in the program, it was simply a prestigious summer camp. But for Andrew Lane, it felt like an entirely different world, both overwhelming and as delicate as a fragile dream. On the first day, Andrew pulled his old suitcase into the dormitory, walking slowly among classmates in floral dresses, designer shoes, and embroidered backpacks. They came from New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. Some had vocal coaches since the age of 7. Others had performed in major theaters or sung with international choirs. And Andrew, from a trailer park in Latch, had never studied music theory and still kept his worn notebook of handwritten lyrics tucked in his suitcase. The opening orientation took place under a domed hall. Clara Jensen, the woman who had introduced Andrew to the program, stood at the podium, her voice soft but resonant. Here we don't seek perfection. We seek souls that tell stories through music. Remember, sometimes the simplest voice is the one people listen to the longest. But Andrew soon realized those words didn't fully reflect what happened behind the scenes. The first workshop was vocal anatomy. The teacher handed out full-color diagrams of the larynx, explaining the diaphragm, vocal folds, and resonance placement. Andrew was bewildered. He had never heard those terms before. Do you know if your voice is soprano or mezzo? One girl asked. I'm not sure, Andrew replied. You've never had vocal training? Andrew smiled uneasily. No, I just sing with my mom. That answer drew a few glances that made him feel like a handmade craft in a high-tech showroom. One girl named Eliza, from an arts academy in Boston, whispered to her neighbor, looks like they picked the wrong student this year. The days that followed weren't easy. In harmony class, Andrew couldn't read music fast enough. In vocal technique, he often lagged behind. Once, he forgot the lyrics altogether from sheer nervousness. Old memories of being mocked at his former school came flooding back like reopened wounds. One night, Andrew sat alone on the dormitory porch, staring at the dim courtyard lights. Clara appeared quietly, took a seat beside him, and placed 2 cups of mint tea between them. I don't think I belong here, Andrew whispered. Why do you think that? I'm not like them. I don't know anything about technique. I come from a place no one's ever heard of. Clara looked at him gently. Andrew, I was once a country girl too. When I got to the conservatory, all I had was a beat-up guitar and a voice. At first, people laughed at my accent and at how I didn't know music theory. But one professor told me, technique can be learned, emotion cannot. You bring something many have forgotten, a reason to sing. Andrew was quiet. He had never thought of that as a strength. A few days later, the class was assigned to prepare a solo for the final performance. Eliza chose a complex Italian aria. Another student picked a Broadway musical number. And Andrew? He chose a classic country song. You Are My Sunshine, the one his mom used to sing when they walked home in the rain. Arms wrapped around a cheap box of bakery leftovers. When Andrew's turn came to step onto the rehearsal stage, many students looked surprised. No backing track, no spotlight, just him and that voice rising again. Light as breath, soft as memory, echoing into silence. Across the room, Eliza, seated in the front row, stopped taking notes. A music instructor let out a long, quiet sigh as if being pulled back to some distant childhood. When Andrew sang the final line, "You make me happy when skies are gray," no one said a word, but everyone felt it. He had reminded the room why music ever moved them in the first place. The final performance at Emerson Conservatory took place at Willow Hall Auditorium, a historic wooden concert hall that seated over 500 people. That day, a light rain fell in Austin. Umbrellas of every color lined up outside the main gate. And inside, the atmosphere buzzed with excitement. Parents, musicians, local journalists, and even talent scouts were in attendance. Andrew Lane stood backstage, clutching a handwritten sheet of his song lyrics. The dress he wore was a light blue gown stitched together by a schoolteacher using 2 old blouses as a gift. His hair was loosely tied back, and around his neck hung a small pendant shaped like the sun. The only gift his mother had ever bought him on his 10th birthday. Joanne, Andrew's mother, sat in the 4th row. She wore a simple outfit, her hair slightly damp from the rain, her eyes fixed on the stage. She had taken the night bus from Latch, carrying a small box of pastries and a hand-embroidered handkerchief bearing her son's name. When she entered the auditorium, she froze for a moment upon seeing other parents in suits and luxury watches. But she didn't waver. My son will stand on that stage, she thought, and I will be the first to rise for him. The program opened with classical pieces, dazzling Broadway excerpts, and booming, well-trained voices. Each act received polite, measured applause. Then the MC announced, "Next, a voice from Latch, Texas. Young Andrew Lane performing, You Are My Sunshine." A small murmur passed through the room. Some whispered, not expecting much from an old folk song. Andrew stepped onto the stage, his legs slightly trembling. The stage lights blurred everything beyond them. He couldn't see his mother, couldn't see Clara, couldn't make out the gazes, whether expectant or doubtful. All he could hear was his heartbeat pounding and the memory of a rainy day. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. His voice rose, soft, low, and true, like a whisper straight from the heart. Each word Andrew sang wasn't just a lyric, it was a story of long nights without electricity, of shared loaves of bread, of being held in the rain while his mother sang with a tired, trembling voice. You make me happy when skies are gray. The auditorium gradually fell silent. A parent in the 3rd row placed a hand over their heart. A student intern covered their mouth. Clara Jensen, seated near the back, looked up, lips pressed tight, eyes shimmering. And then, in the final line, as Andrew, last note, "Please don't take my sunshine away," one person stood. It was Joanne. She didn't clap, she simply stood there, hands over her heart, as if to tell the whole world, "That is my son, and I have heard him my entire life." 1 second, then 2, then the auditorium erupted. Applause thundered like waves. A few people wiped away tears. A journalist quietly lowered their camera and cleaned their glasses. Eliza, the girl who had once looked down on Andrew, turned to her roommate and whispered, "I was wrong." Andrew bowed. This time he wasn't trembling. He knew he had been seen not for being perfect but for being real. The next morning, as Andrew and his mother had breakfast in a small diner down the street, Clara arrived holding an envelope. "Congratulations," she said. The Academy Board held an emergency meeting last night. They'd like to offer you full admission to the year-round program starting this fall. No need to re-audition. Joanne set her fork down, tears streaming. Andrew asked softly, "Can I bring my mom with me?" Clara smiled. "If your mother is the reason you sing like that, then I think the school would be honored." Years later, during a televised interview, the host asked Andrew Lane, now a renowned singer-songwriter, "What moment changed your life the most?" Andrew didn't hesitate. "It was the moment my mother stood up in the middle of the crowd. When no one else knew who I was. She did. And for me, that was enough." And so the story of Andrew Lane comes to a close. From the back row to the spotlight. From an overlooked voice to the heart of hundreds moved into silence. If this story touched you in any way, share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe to help us preserve these beautiful moments in a fast-paced world. We'll see you again on the next journey.